All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's Facebook Live presentation from Legal Aid of North Carolina's Disaster Relief Project. I'm Josh McLean, and I'm a paralegal with the project. Today, I'll be talking a little bit about how to advocate for yourself in the ReBuild NC program. Now, a couple of things that are important to note before we begin. First, please remember that this presentation isn't legal advice. We're just providing general information, and we can't provide specific legal advice unless you're a client. If you have a general question, please ask. But if you have a specific legal question, please either contact legal aid to see if you qualify as a client or reach out to a private attorney. The second thing to remember is this. The ReBuild NC program for Hurricane Florence should be opening up soon, but the final program guidance hasn't been published yet. So most of what I'm saying today is drawn from our experience with the program for Hurricane Matthew. It's looking like the two programs will be very similar, but always check the most recent guidance when you're making a decision. And remember that guidance can change over the course of the program if ReBuild publishes amendments. Now, a little bit about who we are. Legal Aid of North Carolina is a statewide nonprofit law firm, and we provide free legal services to low-income individuals. If you have a civil issue and can't afford a lawyer, we may be able to provide legal advice or to represent you. That means we help with housing and landlord-tenant issues, domestic violence, access to education, and in this case, disaster relief. Our disaster relief project was founded after Hurricane Florence, and we've helped survivors of Hurricanes Florence, Matthew, and Dorian with long-term recovery and disaster-related legal issues. Towards the end of the presentation today, I'll talk a little bit more about what our project can do for you specifically right now. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the ReBuild NC program is a major disaster recovery program. It's funded by the federal government and run by the state. It's designed to be the funding of last resort, which is why the program for Hurricane Florence, which was of course in 2018, is only just now getting close to opening. The ReBuild program can help with some home repairs and replacements, including mobile home replacements, and it can help with some rental unit repairs for landlords, and with a number of other long-term disaster recovery needs. If you want to know more about the program specifically and more detail about what it does, two of my colleagues made a video the other week that covers all of that in more detail and goes through it really nicely. And that video is available on Legal Aid's Facebook page and through YouTube, and we'll link it in the comments on this video. Now, my topic today, advocating for yourself in the ReBuild program, is divided into three parts. Advocating for yourself during the ReBuild program, advocating for yourself after a decision has been made on your case, and advocating for yourself now, before the program has started. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please comment on the video, and either one of my colleagues will address the question there in the comments, or they'll pass it on to me and I'll do my best to answer it at the end of the video. Please keep in mind that any questions you post will be visible to everyone. So if you need to ask a question that involves personal information, it's probably better to call legal aid. Our intake number is at the top of every slide, and so is the link to our website if you would prefer to apply online. Now let's get into this. The thing I'm going to emphasize the most about advocating for yourself during the program is contact with your case manager. When you apply to ReBuild, you will get a case manager, and they'll be your point of communication with the program. They'll be the person you send documents to. They'll be the first line for essentially everything you have to do with ReBuild. So it's really important that you know who that person is and that you know how to get in contact with them. To that end, make sure you keep their name and phone number written down somewhere safe. If you have their email address, keep that written down too. With Hurricane Matthew, we've seen some case managers' phone numbers and email addresses change over the course of the program. So make sure you're aware of that possibility and you write down any changes. Now, it's important to know that your case manager isn't generally going to reach out to you proactively. They're usually not going to call you and give you updates on how things are going in your case. So it's really important that you reach out to them, that you ask them about what's going on, and you get them to explain to you where you are in the process and what's going on with your application. Just having that consistent communication, keeping in contact with your case manager, can be a really effective form of self-advocacy. Building from that, it's also worth considering taking notes when you call your case manager or anyone else with the program, so that you know what was said to you and on what date. This will help you remember more clearly, of course, but it will also give you something to look back at in the future if you're confused or if there's a disagreement about what was said. And those records can be really helpful. In a similar vein, it might not be a bad idea to take someone with you if you're going to meet your case manager in person. like when you first applied to the program. That other person can help you remember the questions you wanted to ask and can also help you remember what was said in that meeting. I should say, though, that this will probably depend on what happens with the coronavirus, because we may not be having face-to-face meetings for a while, and because it may not be safe to bring extra people to a meeting for quite a while. Now, especially with the coronavirus pandemic, most of your communication with your case manager and the ReBuild program as a whole will probably be by phone. Especially right now, I know that many of us are working from home and that lots of us have more people in our homes for more of the time than we usually would as people have moved back. And it can be hectic. So a few things that I know I've been thinking about every time I make a call in the past few weeks that can help make your calls, especially to someone like your case manager, as effective as possible. First, try to make sure you're calling from somewhere quiet, where you can hear your case manager and where they can hear you, and where you aren't going to feel like you have to yell or speak especially loudly. This will just help make sure the conversation is clear and doesn't feel aggressive, even though sometimes those conversations are really frustrating ones. Second, and similarly, try to find somewhere with good phone connection so that you aren't missing parts of the conversation that might be important, and so that your case manager is really hearing what you're saying. Now, finally, these calls often involve personal information or identifying information, so we'd always recommend trying to call from somewhere private, just so you know that no one's overhearing anything you don't want them to. Now, even after a decision is made by ReBuild, everything I just said about contacting your case manager still applies. They're still going to be your primary point of contact. But there are some other things to think about once ReBuild has made a decision. ReBuild has an appeals process with 3 levels. At each level, you have to submit an appeal in writing and give some evidence about why you think the decision was wrong. At least for Hurricane Matthew, the first appeal goes to the ReBuild program itself. The second appeal goes to the state office that's over ReBuild, which is called the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, or NCORR. And the final appeal goes to the State Department of Public Safety, NCDPS. For Hurricane Matthew ReBuild, there was an appeals request form in the award information that folks got, and you needed to complete that form and send it back if you were appealing the decision that was made. Now, it's really important to know that the timelines for requesting an appeal were pretty tight, again, at least for Hurricane Matthew. That could look different for Florence, but you should assume that you'll only have a few weeks to request an appeal, and you should assume that you're going to have to fill out that appeals request form. So make sure that you're carefully reading any documents before you sign them, and that you're reading right when you get them, to make sure that you request an appeal if you disagree with the decision. Just to be clear, that doesn't have to mean that you didn't get anything. If you got an award, but the amount seems wrong, or you're being asked to pay funds into an escrow account, and you don't think that's right, it's important that you take that first step of requesting an appeal. Now, if you got an award and you think something is wrong about it, or if you didn't get any assistance and you think you should have, that's a great time to contact legal aid. Our project can help you understand ReBuild's guidance to see if your decision really was wrong, and we can help you file an appeal with all the documents that need to be included, and we can advocate on your behalf with the program. Now, if you do want to contact us, I just want to give you a sense of what that's going to look like so you know what to expect. Let's say you call our intake number at the top of the screen. First, I want you to know that you might be on hold for a little bit because we get a lot of calls, but I promise you that someone will get to you. I think the average hold time is something like 10 minutes. Once you're talking to someone, there's an intake process where they'll need to ask you a few questions about your income and your situation, just to make sure that you qualify for our services, because there are certain requirements about who we can help, and to make sure you have a legal problem that we can try and help with. That usually only takes a few minutes. If you qualify for our services and have a legal issue that we can help with, your name will either be passed on to a lawyer who can contact you, give you legal advice, or depending on the issue and what exactly is involved legally, your name may go to an attorney who would represent you, who would be your attorney for that issue. But let's not just talk about what could happen down the line, because there are important things that you can be doing right now to help get yourself in a better place for when ReBuild opens up for Hurricane Florence. Working on some of these things can really help you get assistance down the line. The first thing to think about is collecting documents that you'll need to show ReBuild. Maybe the most important thing to have is receipts from any repairs you've made and for any disaster relief money you got. If you got any money from FEMA for Florence, keep receipts to show how you use that money. If you got money from a nonprofit, a church, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, Keep receipts to show what you did with that money. You'll need to show ReBuild how you spent that money and that you spent that money, quote, as it was intended, meaning as the group that gave it to you said it was going to be spent. That means that you need to be able to show that repair money went to repairs, or else you can run into issues with what ReBuild calls duplication of benefits. At least for Hurricane Matthew, that's meant that some folks were required to put money that ReBuild deemed duplicated into an escrow account before they could get assistance. If you want to know more about these issues, again, please watch the video my colleagues put together on ReBuild the other week. It goes into more detail than I have time to go into here. Now, obviously, we want to avoid these kinds of problems, which is why receipts are so important. If you don't have receipts, try and document repairs in other ways. You could take pictures of any repairs that were made, for example. We have seen some cases, I'll say, where repairs were made and then those repairs got damaged, so it looked like nothing had been done. So do try and take pictures as soon after repairs are made as you can. But generally, the takeaway is to document how any disaster assistance money you've gotten from Hurricane Florence has been spent. Some documentation is always going to be better for that than none. Now, receipts and pictures aren't the only things that it's important for you to have for ReBuild. ReBuild is also going to want to see proof that you own your home. Specifically, they're going to want to see your name on the deed. Now, if your name is on the deed, that's great, and make sure you have a copy of it saved somewhere safe. If your name isn't on the deed, that could just be because the land belongs to someone else in your family and they're letting you live there. It could also mean that your land is heir property, that's H-E-I-R, meaning that it was owned by your parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents, and they passed it on to their descendants without a will. In that case, the ownership is probably shared between you and a number of your relatives. One of my colleagues made a great presentation the other week on heir property and how ownership issues can impact disaster recovery and can stand in the way of getting assistance. That's available on our Facebook page and on YouTube, and it will also be linked in the comments today. I'd strongly recommend that you go check it out if you think there's any chance that this applies to you or if you just want to know more. Now, not having your name on the deed doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get assistance from ReBuild. It does make it a little trickier though. So this is another situation where it could be a very good idea to contact legal aid. One of the things we can do for you right now is to help you clarify your ownership situation, both to help make sure that you don't have issues for Florence ReBuild when it opens, and at the same time, to put you in a better situation for any future storms, so that these same issues hopefully don't come up again. Again, call our intake number or apply online. All that information is at the top of the screen. Here at the end of the presentation, I'll also mention a few other services the Disaster Relief Project can provide right now. Speaking of clarifying ownership and helping make sure you're in a good position for natural disasters, we can help you write wills. If you were hit by Hurricane Florence and want to make sure that ownership of your land is clear now and for future generations, a will can be a great tool to do that, and it's something we can help with right now. Another couple things we can do right now, just so anyone watching knows. If you were hit by Hurricane Florence and are still wrestling with your insurance company, they won't cover something you think is in the policy or they're holding onto a check, we might be able to help with that. Give us a call and explain what's going on. And finally, if you might have been the victim of contractor fraud after Hurricane Florence, someone was supposed to make repairs to your home, but just took the money. Someone took the money, but only made a few repairs or made very bad repairs. Contact us, and we may be able to help you recover some of that money, or at least make it harder for that contractor to do the same thing again. That's it for what I'm covering today, so I'll stop there. This video will be available on our Facebook page and on YouTube in the future, so you can always go back and rewatch. If you have any questions, remember to post them in the chat. If you're watching this in the future, not live, you can still post your questions in the comments, and we'll check back occasionally to try and answer those. Thank you all for being with us today, and best of luck as you gear up for another hurricane season.